Welcome, and thank you for joining Price Formation Enhancement Initiative Workshop. Before we begin, please ensure you have your chat panel open by clicking the chat icon located at the bottom right of your WebEx screen. If you require any technical assistance, please use the chat to send a message to the event producer. Polling questions will launch on the right-hand side of your screen. Once you have selected your answers, click the Submit button to record your answers. For Q&A, you can submit your questions through the chat at any time. In the drop-down chat menu, make sure to select all panelists, then enter your question into the message box and click the Send icon. All verbal questions will be taken during the Q&A portion of the event. I will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Brenda Corona.
Thank you, Adrian, and welcome everyone. We have a group here on site at Folsom, California, and on behalf of the Stakeholders Affairs Group, we welcome you to our first stakeholder working group for the Price Formation Enhancement Initiative. We will go ahead and get started with a few housekeeping reminders. As this call is being recorded and will be posted for those communities' purposes only, any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As these collaborative working groups are intended to stimulate open dialogue, engage different perspectives, we advise that everyone, keep their comments professional and respectful. And then those who have any questions, please refrain from repeating any other comments made. But we do encourage those who have any feedback that are added from another stakeholder, please make sure, let us know if you agree with them, and that way we can kind of keep note of that. The following instructions are about raising your hand, so make sure when you're connected via audio, you will use the raise hand icon that's located in the middle of your screen. Make sure to press #2 if you're just logged in through the device, and also remember to state your name and affiliation when speaking. And those who are in the room, make sure you could use your table tents and place them upward, and we'll know you have a question, and the mic in front of you will be unmuted when you press on the button to turn green. Also, if you have any questions during the call, feel free to send me a chat to myself or my event producer, Adrian, and we will be able to help you. These are not the right slides. We're going to have to. 1 second, Adrian. Can you go ahead and and we need the other slides that are not this one. Can I go ahead and present my slides?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. Okay.
Okay.
So to add on to the instructions I'm providing here today, our group would like to introduce a new feature of Slido, which will help attendees and also people who are on site participate in a survey and questions. And this survey is anonymous, so when you do participate in the survey, it's going to be located on the right screen, and that way we can engage with everyone and ask questions throughout. Today we're going to keep it simple, so it's going to be a few questions till the end, and we'll let everyone know when those questions are there. As well, we will give the passcode to attendees who are here on site. But as a reminder, the WebEx feature, when you do raise your hand, does lock you, so make sure don't unmute yourself because it will lock you again. So we'll keep an eye out for that, but at the same time, just let us know if you have any questions and we'll move forward. For today's agenda, we will be going quickly over the working group deliverables with Juan, and then we'll bring it back to overall issue paper with James, and then lastly, we'll kind of wrap things up with the guiding principles and problem statements and open discussion. At that time, we'll be using the Slido app that's located on your WebEx and on your phone, and then we'll wrap things up for the next steps. At this time, we want to introduce a similar timeline that was introduced in a previous working group. For this timeline, we want to do the concept of the pre-development phase for the PFE approach. So back in March, we did a workshop, and we had a lot of feedback, and we used that feedback to kind of work things out with our timeline. At this time, we did an initiative update call in June where we discussed the working group process and other elements of the price formation enhancements for phase 1. For phase 1, we will be trying to do the scarcity pricing, BA level mitigation, and fast start pricing for both Phase 1 and 2. At this time, we did post a week ago, the 17th, the overall paper. Feel free to visit that paper since we will be discussing that today. We'll be sending a link for those who haven't seen it on the chat. And our goal for the working groups for this phase will be from August 3rd through October 26th. And our goal for November, December is to have a fast start pricing data analytics report that later James will kind of talk about in terms of what kind of report we're trying to give to our stakeholder community. For this policy initiative stakeholder process still stands as where we're currently in the proposal development phase, and we are attending these workshops to improve our stakeholder process, so we appreciate everyone's feedback if there's any comments during these working groups that we're going to be having every week. At this time, we are trying to take notes, and as described for today's meeting, I'll be making sure I capture any action items and share that with my team. And we are looking forward to a productive meeting, and we appreciate those who are on site today as we are trying to move into a more hybrid structure, but also we're going to be doing virtual meetings that we'll be discussing in the next steps. At this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Juan, who will take on for the next few slides.
Thank you, Brenda. So I will be the facilitator for this working group. Excited to be here with all of you. We are going to, as we mentioned in the last stakeholder call for price formations, be leveraging this. We went into great detail on the intent and the structure of working groups. This being the first working group, we would like to spend a little bit of time kind of reviewing that issue paper that we posted, the collection of all of the stakeholder comments and works that had already taken place within this initiative leading up to this working group session number 1. So just really quickly want to highlight for those who perhaps were not on that call roughly a month ago where we talked about this working group deliverables. So I want everyone to kind of keep this in mind. As we move through all of these sessions, we are driving towards the deliverable of an action plan. And that's really to serve as kind of the bridge between what these very, interactive, we're looking for interactive discussion and engagement here with the community between the working groups and the straw proposal itself. That will then serve as the bridge between the working groups and the straw proposal itself. It's also going to recap all of the perspectives that are shared. So Brenda mentioned as the scribe facilitator, and then with our policy lead here in James Friedrich, we will create that action plan that will be posted, and you will have an opportunity to provide written comment on that action plan. So you can see here via this graphic, there is somewhat of an iterative approach to the working groups within PFE. We do have this phased out, so we're excited to kick off today where we are focusing specifically on scarcity pricing and BAA level market power mitigation. We will have a separate working group within the PFE initiative for fast start pricing where we'll capture the analysis scoping for the discussion to continue in phase 2. So a couple of recap items on what we're trying to do here within the working group itself. We're really trying to define the guiding principles and the problem statements. We'll go through the overview of the issue paper, and then we will be leveraging the Slido polling feature here to really hopefully spur the conversation. We want to hear from you guys, so you're able to do that via the WebEx, via voting, via entering your chat. But we're really looking forward to an engaging discussion here. The other part or priority for these working groups that we're looking for is really to get that alignment on those priorities, establish the cadence to work with you guys. That's both balancing the California ISO staff bandwidth, that's balancing your stakeholder bandwidth. This is something that is going to be organic. We want to hear from you guys if you feel like we are moving too quickly, if we're moving too slowly. We're committed to having some flexibility here and just making sure that we're driving towards that action plan and getting that deliverable and getting the solution that encapsulates everybody's perspective to the greatest extent possible. So that kind of leads me into this third item here. We're really here at this working group to justify those problem statements, illustrate those problem statements, and get to proposed solutions. That will be a little bit later in the working group sessions here. I think, again, initially here, we're laying out the foundation to get the guiding principles and problem statements nailed down, so to speak, so that we can start going into those proposed solutions. And then finally, again, producing that action plan so that we can move into the straw proposal and policy development here, serving as that bridge between the working groups and the policy development itself. So for today's working group session, and I'm going to do this for every working group session, I'd like for us all to, again, we're going to have a lot of engaging conversation, hopefully. We want to hear from you guys, but let's have a goal in mind for each session. So the session today, we're hoping to go over that issue paper, kind of take stock and recap of where we are at within price formations, because a lot of you have already engaged with the California ISO on this topic. And our walk away for today, let's try to focus in at the end of this session on the guiding principles and the problem statements themselves. You know, what can we, quote unquote, you'll see here, accept as agreed upon by this community to go ahead and move into the policy development phase. If there's strong agreement on a guiding principle, on a problem statement, we can then focus our efforts, our time on the other items that require further discussion. Ideally, we'd like to walk away identifying those guiding principles and problem statements that are going to need that further discussion, that further refinement to reflect needs and concerns of the stakeholder community here. And also, we'd like to capture any newly proposed guiding principles or problem statements for us to explore further in the next session and moving forward as well within the working group structure. And that is, I want to highlight this, inclusive of stakeholder presentations. So if you are interested in presenting on one of these topics, we encourage you to reach out to us. So again, we're excited about this new model of stakeholder engagement here at the ISO. With that, I'd like to turn it over to James Friedrich to go over the issue paper that we posted at the stakeholder initiative page for PFE. So, James, the floor is yours. Yeah.
All right, thanks Juan and thanks Brenda. So I'll have, maybe roughly 45 minutes, maybe to an hour to, first I appreciate the opportunity to get to discuss with stakeholders the overview paper that we posted a few weeks ago. The intention of my presentation is not necessarily to go too deep into the conversation yet. It's an introduction into some of the topics that we'll be talking about. And so, in order to make good use of our time today, I just want to let everyone know, as the working groups progress, we will be getting deep into all of these issues, and that for this purpose of my presentation, we'll try to keep any questions to clarifying questions or things that could be answered quickly, just knowing that there's deeper discussion available down the road. So, just a quick summary of some of the recent developments that have been happening on price formation. One of the things that's unique about price formation relative to the other ISO initiatives that are happening right now, incorporating the working group structure, is that price formation already has had some history. And so where other working groups are sort of starting from the bottom, price formation had an issue paper posted in June 2022. There were stakeholder comments to that issue paper. There was a stakeholder workshop on the issue paper. There were 3 stakeholder workshops on price formation principles and delving into price formation mechanics, and also a little bit on fast start pricing. And so we don't want to lose the work that we've done to date. That being said, we felt like it was helpful for stakeholders to post this overview paper with the intention of sort of corralling all of the ideas that had been thrown out there, either by ISO staff through the issue paper or by stakeholders through their comments and responses in those workshops, to sort of define the starting line, so to speak, for these working groups. It is not the finish line that we're defining, it is the starting line. So we did our best to try to review all of the comments, all of the materials that had been sent in and provide the best overview that we could. So the overview paper does cover the two main topics of the first working group structure for price formation. That's scarcity pricing and BAA level market power mitigation. So the purposes of our discussions going forward, these will be the topics that we will focus on. As Brenda and Juan sort of teed up, once this working group of these topics wraps up, we will then proceed into the fast start pricing analysis working group. So that will pick off right when we're finished. Ultimately, you know, there's a lot of working groups going on. We're trying to make sure that we maintain a pacing that staff and stakeholders can stay afloat and participate productively and not be too overwhelmed. So we felt like it was important to try to work on only a few topics at a time. So just a really high level, the bullets here describe a really high level description of what scarcity pricing and BA level market power mitigation are. We're going to get into, each slide will describe sort of principles and issues described for each of these in the overview paper, but at a high level, when we talk about scarcity pricing, we're talking about CAISO's pricing mechanisms under scarcity conditions. And then for BA level market power mitigation, it really comes down, in my mind, to three questions that need to be answered. First is whether or not BA level market power mitigation that is applied in the Western EIM today should apply also in the EDAM. That's question one. Question two, independent of that answer, are there enhancements to the methodology for BA level market power mitigation that we can make? So one idea that's been presented is a possible grouping approach. So that's an idea of an enhancement that can be made. And then finally, consideration of the CAISO's BA inclusion in the test, BA level market power test for the Western EIM, the EDAM, or both. So those are the topics to be discussed. For context, BA level market power mitigation was discussed briefly under the context of EDAM, and it was decided to defer that subject to this initiative. And so because of that, there is a tight link to EDAM, and hence wanting to get this topic discussed sooner rather than later. I'll also note that in combination, as we'll see on the next, in upcoming slides about, you know, there is sort of a relationship here between scarcity pricing and market power mitigation in the sense that there are concerns you don't want one without the other. And so in that case, for that reason, they're sort of bundled as a group here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about first scarcity pricing, and then after, I'll maybe pause every 2 or 3 slides, and then once I'm done with scarcity pricing, we'll go through the market power mitigation section, and then I'll turn it back over to Juan to open up for a more deeper discussion. So again, I just want to emphasize that these are a collection of the community's thoughts. None of these ideas yet represent policy at this point. We're at the discussion phase, the scoping phase, so please do keep that in mind that all of these are ideas at this point, and we're trying to identify the primary issues to tackle for both of these topics. There's an idea that the current CAISO energy bid caps and penalty prices may not provide appropriate incentives for market participants in tight system conditions. And there's sort of 2 ways of thinking about this. In one case, when we're talking about more of the energy side of power balance constraint penalty prices and offer caps, for context, most of the time, day-ahead market and real-time market have applied the same energy bid caps and energy power balance constraint penalty prices. In some cases, when we have FERC Order 831 conditions that apply, the real-time market can go to a higher offer cap and power balance constraint cap, but it tends to be the case that when those conditions apply, they apply jointly in the day-ahead market and real-time market. And there's concern that there are poor incentives for day-ahead market participants market participants from all types because of a lack of potential downside risk in the day-ahead market when real-time market and day-ahead market prices when real-time market prices are not allowed to or not enabled to go higher than day-ahead market prices. And in the issue paper, we talk more specifically from each of these four perspectives here, from load, supply, convergence bidders, and for storage resources, why it may be resulting in poor incentives for day-ahead market participant, appropriate, accurate scheduling, and things like that. So that'll be something that we will talk about as a group. A separate but similar issue is that there's discussion about needing to holistically re-examine reserve scarcity values. So this is not energy offers or energy power balance constraint prices, but actually the reserve scarcity values. So we're talking about regulation, operating reserve, flexible ramp, possibly even imbalance reserve. And so, you know, those are all sort of scaled on the energy power balance constraint price. But similarly, it might be worthwhile to re-examine those penalty prices as well to make sure they are all synergizing. I do want to share this graphic that I thought was interesting. This is a comparative example for scarcity premiums across 7 of the U.S. ISOs. This is work done, the reference to the paper that this comes from. This is actually a really nice review generally of scarcity pricing across the North American markets. And so if you have access to this paper, it would be a good thing to read. Just a few things to point out here. You know, the ISO, the California ISO in this figure is the yellow line at the bottom here. And what this graphic attempts to do is to map out at different levels of reserve scarcity what the relevant reserve price or shortage price would look like. And so if you're following it from left to right, moving from the $1,000 reserve shortage price for regulation, moving into spin, non-spin, and then the very tail end of the curve is representing the FRP downward sloping demand curve. So it's interesting to think about these things in connection with what other ISOs are doing. I will note that in cases where FERC Order 831 conditions apply and the power balance constraint cap moves from 1,000 to 2,000, that effectively many of these bars vertically would actually raise up to the 2,000. So we would be sort of more in the middle of the pack than it appears from the slide. But it is interesting. I think part of the working group discussions will need to talk about, you know, what are the other ISO and RTOs doing. And also for context, I mean, ERCOT is another outlier on the slide. Applying the operating reserve demand curve that ERCOT applies may not be quite as relevant to any of the other markets because ERCOT does not have a formal capacity market and so uses scarcity pricing as sort of almost an RA construct. That may not be as relevant to some of the other ISOs. So anyway, I hope that this is interesting, and again, the link or the paper where this figure comes from is linked here at the bottom. I know there's a question, so I'm going to share one more slide before I stop. The second sort of, because it's sort of related here, is an idea that CAISO's AS scarcity pricing may not be effective in setting scarcity prices. And actually, there are a number of potential issues with the reason why this may be true. And the reason why this is important is because AS scarcity pricing effectuates energy scarcity pricing through opportunity cost. So as the availability of reserves gets scarce and scarce, ideally you would want to see that scarcity reflected in the price of energy as well as the price of AS. And AS scarcity, or AS, you might hear AS shortage pricing is the mechanism to do that. There's at least 4 reasons why AS scarcity pricing as it exists in our market today is not fully effective. One is that the CAISO only procures incremental AS in real time. We do not re-optimize fully the AS with energy in any real-time market run. And so only in cases where incremental AS needs to be procured could an AS scarcity price affect the real-time energy price. Another major one, and to me probably the biggest one on this list, is that the CAISO market only applies AS scarcity pricing during an actual shortage, which really is too late, honestly, to apply scarcity pricing. The point of scarcity pricing is to indicate in advance of a shortage condition that you're experiencing scarce conditions, and that price signal applies in the energy price before you reach an actual shortage. And I think that that's a major thing that this working group should explore. The CAISO market only procures incremental AS in FMM and not in RTD. So if there, again, to the extent there is incremental AS purchase, it's only in FMM, and so the price signal, the AS shortage pricing signal is not relevant in RTD. And also, just for the entire Western market, the Western EIM does not procure AS outside of the CAISO. And so that could mean that there may be shortcomings in scarcity pricing for other market participants as well. So I'll stop there to see if there's any clarifying questions. And again, we're happy to we'll be providing time to have deeper discussion about all of these. So please keep the questions brief and clarifying if possible.
Yeah, if we could please unmute Alan Meck.
Alan, you are now unmuted.
Your slide 15 was really interesting, but I wondered if, so this only contains other RTOs and ISOs, so we basically have CAISO data and then the entire Eastern interconnect. I'm wondering, and I know this is hard because it's probably like more bilateral trading prices and hubs, but do you have any data from the rest of WEC on what their scarcity pricing looks like for comparison?
At this point, no, but I think that's an interesting addition here, and definitely something that comes up in the discussion and is relevant to one of the principles that we'll be talking about, how all market participants in the West, whether or not there is, the market is providing appropriate incentives in scarcity conditions relative to non-market opportunities for supply in the West. And so data like that should help inform that question. I think that's a good comment.
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. So we'll move to slide 17. There's an idea that today's bid cost recovery rules may not provide appropriate incentives for energy storage resources during tight system conditions. And so this is, I'm going to be honest, I think that the ISO is not prepared to tackle all of the bid cost recovery issues that may be present with storage resources today. And this is more of a highlighting that one of the things we need to be thinking about when doing scarcity pricing is that their applicability of storage resources may not be similar to other resource types because of bid cost recovery type provisions, and we need to think about that. So the whole idea of scarcity pricing is to reward available suppliers during tight system conditions. For storage resources, that means you need to have available state of charge during those times. And there's a thought that current bid cost recovery rules may prevent scarcity pricing from having this intended incentive on storage resources because, in a sense, it insulates them from buying back their day-ahead awards at higher prices, where bid cost recovery can sort of shield them from those losses. And so that may or may not be appropriate, but it's something that I think the working group needs to think about in terms of if you want to have scarcity pricing having the right effect on storage, we might need to be looking at the BCR rules, or potentially other changes may be needed to address these challenges. CAISO may need to evaluate administrative pricing for energy and AS during periods of curtailed demand. And so we do have, back in the initiative Market Enhancements for Summer 2021 Readiness, there was a helpful addition to the market by when the CAISO market is or CAISO operators are asking load-serving entities to arm load. We put those energy bids into the bid stack at the maximum applicable price, which is helpful. But there are some thoughts circulating that the CAISO may need to go further in thinking about actual administrative pricing during periods of curtailed demand, which is essentially to say, the way I'm defining administrative pricing here, I'm thinking of CAISO taking the software produced price and changing it to some other value, or call it an administrative price. So I'm not thinking necessarily the same thing as a penalty price here, but perhaps the CAISO should consider mechanisms to ensure that the energy price is the same as the power balance constraint violation price for the entire period of curtailed demand. So if we're shedding load, maybe we need to be thinking about mechanisms to keep that price at the highest level possible, and certainly wouldn't want to be seeing energy prices going down during periods of curtailed demand, which sends exactly the wrong signal to the market. Similarly, we could consider mechanisms to ensure the operating reserve marginal price is the same as the power balance constraint violation price for the entire period of curtailed demand. Because if you think about it, on the margin, if you're shedding load, an additional unit of operating reserve, an additional unit of load or of supply for energy is essentially providing the same value because there's scarcity between them. So that's something also that we can consider as well. CAISO may need to reassess no-pay rules for AS to ensure that unavailable suppliers repay the replacement costs associated with procuring real-time ancillary services. So there's maybe two ways of doing it. One could be that you modify the settlement structure of AS to mirror that of energy, in which case energy sort of has a buyback or resources that aren't available to provide energy in the real-time market with a day-ahead schedule have to buy back their schedule at the real-time price. Maybe you could do that with AS as well. Or you could also make alterations potentially to the no-pay provisions of the AS, where if a resource is unavailable to provide the AS, maybe they pay back the higher of the day-ahead AS price they were awarded, or the real-time AS price that could potentially be exacerbated in the upward direction by their unavailability. Okay, so I'll pause to see if there's any clarifying questions at this point. All right.
Yeah, one question in the queue. Go ahead, your line is now unmuted.
Hi, James, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey, I have a quick question, and I'm not quite sure if it's implied in these various slides you have here, but I didn't see it explicitly, so I just wanted to ask if the CAISO is thinking about this, and if so, maybe adding the additional clarification might be useful, or at least pointing me to which slide here you have that speaks to that. And it's the idea that that market prices start to increase as we get closer to scarcity conditions. I know you have the one in there that says once we're there, we need to have, you know, stronger price signals, but there's also that idea that as you start to even get closer to those conditions, you start seeing prices rise. So I'm not sure if that's implied in one of these slides, or if maybe we need to consider explicitly stating that somewhere.
Yeah, great comment. So it is captured in an upcoming slide that will talk a little bit about principles for scarcity pricing. And I did allude to it a little earlier that my personal opinion is that I agree. I think that our scarcity pricing is ineffective at doing that, and it would be more effective to signal scarcity through gradual upward increases in price as you approach this actual scarcity condition, just as you mentioned. So we are tracking that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Of course, that's all subject to the working group discussion, and that's, okay, we're good. All right. We're still on scarcity pricing. There's a few, I think a few more issues here. Energy storage resources bids and default energy bids for when mitigation applies today are limited to a bid cap of $1,000, which may not reflect opportunity costs in tight system conditions when the bid cap is raised to $2,000. So this seems like a relatively straightforward idea that to the extent that the power balance constraint and the offer cap increases to the $2,000 level, we should consider updating energy storage resource bids and debts to scale to that value so that storage resources can reflect the true value and opportunity cost. Next slide, CAISO's market today. Now, I say the word lacks a mechanism. I wish I had that phrase back. I'm going to say it, but then I'm going to retract it a little bit. But CAISO's market lacks a mechanism to reflect the dynamics of significant non-market demand response and strategic reserve resources in real-time price formation. I want to walk back lacks a mechanism a little bit in the sense that strategic reserve resources will be bidding into the market when they're called upon. And so to that extent, their bids are considered as part of the stack like any other resource. But there's questions about whether or not it's appropriate in terms of sort of the loading order of resources, and if strategic reserves are intended to be an emergency resource, do we want to have mechanisms to ensure that when emergency resources are called upon, we also have emergency prices? And so, you know, one of the challenges of having sort of non-market or emergency type resources is that once you add them to the stack, they put downward pressure on the price, and that may be the opposite effect you want to have on price formation at those times. So something for the working group to think about are better mechanisms needed to reflect these types of resources in the price formation. Of course, they play a critical role in maintaining grid reliability. So I think I explained these bullets. Let's move to the next slide. This is the last idea that sort of came out of the issue paper and the stakeholder comments. Today, CAISO's market does not currently have what's called a circuit breaker mechanism in the event scarcity pricing occurs for an extended period of time. So I'll just note, I'll note first the bottom bullet, which that similar discussions are ongoing in PJM and in ERCOT in response to winter storms that caused several days of scarcity pricing. And I think ERCOT may have already implemented its design. I think PJM is pretty close, but something for us potentially to track. The idea basically that if scarcity pricing occurs for an extended period of time, it could lead to very high prices that are economically damaging without any commensurate operational benefit. And so we saw that play out in Texas where scarcity pricing triggered, but there wasn't sufficient response from resources because of the freeze. And so you have these really high scarcity prices and not having the commensurate benefit in terms of incentivizing the suppliers to perform at that time. So a circuit breaker mechanism is essentially a stop loss to mitigate scarcity pricing when they're no longer providing incentives for suppliers. And there's, you know, a lot of potential ideas and ways to do that potentially. So just another idea. I'll pause there to see if there's any clarifications or questions on those 3 slides.
So again, we will have much deeper discussion on this, but we're going to be moving into more of the guiding principles and problem statements and proposals for new ones later on in this session. So please do feel free to ask any clarifying question that you have on what James is presenting here by raising your hand.
I'd actually like to go back before I go forward, and I had a mental note to remind myself that on this slide, in the context of scarcity pricing for AS, there's also an issue floating around where Department of Market Monitoring has issued a report recently to flag that their perception that the demand curves are not implemented properly and are not providing the intended functionality. And so that's also something that should be on this working group's radar, is to the extent you're using demand curves to set reserve shortage pricing, good to have those demand curves working as intended. So I should have put that on the slide as an idea this working group should discuss. Okay, moving back forward. I'm moving now to BA level market power mitigation. So that was hopefully a good summary of potential issues for scarcity pricing we can all talk about. Juan's going to talk about principles for scarcity pricing as well. But let's dive in a little bit. High-level issues for BA-level market power mitigation. So there's an opportunity potentially to improve the DCPA is the dynamic competitive path assessment. If we need to do some 101 refreshers on market power mitigation in these working groups, we can do that. If you're not familiar with that term, it might be good to let us know if we need to do some more 101 level discussion there. But we may be able to improve the existing dynamic competitive path assessment as it applies to BA level market power mitigation by considering all constraints impacted by a resource, not just those within the same balancing authority area. So there's an opportunity to do that in the EDAM and the Western EIM. Currently, the DCPA only considers constraints in the same balancing area, which may not reflect the true scope of a resource's impact. If a resource is able to impact congestion at a local area in a different balancing authority area, it may be possible to reflect that in our mitigation procedures, whether or not that's desirable. There's also an opportunity here potentially to make the BA level market power mitigation approach more accurate and efficient by employing a grouping methodology to group BAs together when performing the DCPA. Today, BA level market power measures are only applied independently for each balancing authority area and do not consider potentially competitive supply across a group of areas. And so in the 2022 issue paper, CAISO did put forth sort of an introductory grouping methodology with which to sort of stimulate discussion. And there's a lot of ideas going around about whether that's desirable, and if it is desirable, what's the best methodology to pursue. So on that note, there are some concerns that the grouping methodology that CAISO put out may need to be holistically evaluated by this working group. I provide a couple examples here. One is that the methodology put forth in the issue paper assumes that if the BA that has the highest power balance constraint shadow price is competitive, that all of the other, it follows that all of the other BAs in the WEAM are also competitive, and there are some concerns that may not be completely true. Again, there's actually a balance here between the complexity, how complex the methodology is and its accuracy, and so that's something this working group's going to need to balance, and which is what I mentioned on the second bullet. Other alternative grouping methodologies may be able to provide a better balance between computational complexity and accuracy of market power mitigation, and this is an example that DMM had put together in their comments, and we'll be thinking about as well in this topic. So I'm not going to read all that out, but it's here on the slide and in the overview paper for discussion. There wasn't a whole lot of detail given to what makes up the residual supply index, or the RSI, for this type of test. So the ISO, in doing that, we need to provide more detail, and it would be worthwhile, we think, for stakeholders to discuss what makes up the supply and demand side of the residual supply index for these tests. And this concern is another concern from the DMM comments about, if you're assuming non-transfer exports as load in determining an entity's supply in the RSI, that may lead to gaps in detecting and mitigating market power. So things to think about, what's the composition of the RSI? And again, if that term is unfamiliar to you, it is an indication we may need to spend some time talking more about mitigation fundamentals as well. A big question in this is whether or not the CAISO should be included, the CAISO BA should be included in the grouping method. So currently today, CAISO BA is not part of the BA level market power mitigation test performed in the Western EIM. There's history to that. And so the question for this working group will tackle is whether that continues to be appropriate, for the WEAM and then for the EDAM if such market power mitigation were to apply to the EDAM, whether or not it's appropriate for the CAISO BA to be included in those tests in the EDAM as well. There are discussions in the comments about whether or not the ISO or CAISO could apply a conduct and impact framework in the BA level market power mitigation that other ISOs and RTOs use. So conduct and impact type evaluation sort of is a two-part test. It evaluates first whether a supplier's offer is significantly higher than the reference cost of energy for that technology type. And then second part of the test is an impact test to determine whether or not that offer would be would significantly impact the market price. And if that offer is seen to have failed both the conduct and impact test, mitigation measures can be applied. So I want to be very clear on this slide. The working group discussion is BA level market power mitigation only. This working group is not intended to discuss potential enhancements or changes to local market power mitigation. So to the extent that a conduct and impact type framework could fit into a BA level market power test, we're certainly willing to explore that. But we just do want to define what's in scope here, and that it is not within the intention of this working group to be discussing this in context of local market power mitigation. Finally, there's a question, I believe it was Southern California Edison who raised this in their comments, who said whether or not BA level market power mitigation should apply differently to resources or to BAs that fail the resource efficiency evaluation. I would assume for both EDAM and for real time. Maybe another thing to think about for the working group discussion as well. I think that was my last slide. Let me just double check. Yep, that was my last slide. If there's any questions or comments at this point. All right.
We could go ahead and unmute Callie, please.
Hi, James. It's Callie Wells with WPTF. I actually had more of a higher level comment on this topic. So is now a good time to ask or make that comment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we really appreciate the approach you guys have taken to this, and really starting off with the issues and problem statements. You guys did a really good job outlining that for scarcity pricing. When it comes to the BA level mitigation, it seems like the paper and these slides all kind of read as jumping that step and now talking about what changes we can consider. So I think it's really important that we start conversations on both of these topics at the same point. Like you mentioned, they are somewhat related. So I would encourage the CAISO to take a step back and first frame these as issues and problem statements, and then evaluate, those issues and problems. I think that DMM just issued their annual report, and we're seeing their evaluation of, system level competitiveness is there's very few hours with uncompetitive conditions. So I think we really need to start with taking a big step back on this topic, and again, framing these more as problem statements so we can understand what are the issues in the market today that we need to address before jumping to, options that we should consider making changes.
Thanks so much for the comment. So a couple reactions, if I may. I agree with the comment. One difference a little bit between scarcity pricing and the market power mitigation, honestly, is that because the market power mitigation discussion was deferred from the EDAM discussion, that the intention of talking about it is, in my mind, much more well-defined than scarcity pricing, in the sense that I kind of go back to, I don't know if I have those three questions on my slide, but let me go way back here. Sorry for the flipping of slides, but again, back on slide 12, I sort of see it, and again, we're not intending to presume any of these things, just things that need to be discussed in the working group. But first, you're absolutely right. We need to get back down to some basic questions about, first, should BA level market power mitigation apply at all to the EDAM? So before any of that content has any meaning, we need to answer that question, of course, and I think that's part of your comment. Now, whether or not we do apply BA level market power mitigation to the EDAM, we may be able to make enhancements to the existing BA level market power mitigation that applies in the EIM through something like a grouping approach. So that's sort of an independent question to the first one. And then also, should the CAISO BA be included in these tests? And so what we want is to tee up those questions for stakeholders and help us, have you help us understand what information you would want to see to answer those three questions. And I hope we didn't intend to jump too far into the enhancements before answering those critical questions. So let me know if you have any feedback to that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think in our minds, before you ask the question of should we, for example, should we include the CAISO BA in the EDAM mitigation or in the WEAM mitigation, I think there's a first question we need to ask or identify is what is the issue we're trying to address? What is the problem we have that would then lead us to ask that second question? So it's almost like taking a step back and asking that first question before we then go to should this, should CAISO BA be included, just as one example. So I think, and back to your first point, yes, conversations happened in the EDAM discussions and that was deferred to this, but even during those conversations, we kept asking those same questions, and it was our understanding that framing of the issue and problem statement would take place here. So I think it would just be really useful to, again, start both the conversations with scarcity pricing and BA level mitigation at the same point and make sure everyone fully understands the problems that we're seeing and the issues that we're seeing that are then making us ask these questions.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback, and I've noted that. So I do think we could do a little bit. We can do a better work in, I guess, defining issues in advance. I mean, because in order to answer the question about should it be included, we need to talk about what is it for, how is it different than other types of mitigation procedures, is it effective in the WEAM, are there differences? There's a whole bunch of questions, honestly, that sort of need to be answered before answering that question. So we need to do a little bit more work in digging those questions up, and maybe stakeholders can help us identify through this working group other questions that can help us lead to that answer.
Yeah, exactly. Great. And yeah, I'd point you also to the DMM's annual report too as a metric to look at in terms of their competitiveness study that they do. But that's all I had. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much. Are there any other questions or comments, or anybody want to follow on with Callie's comments on mitigation? Okay, no questions means I'm going to pass it back over to Juan to move us to the next step. Let me first get you to the right slide.
Thank you very much, James. I do want to kind of piggyback on that conversation there with Callie. Callie, that is, your comments do resonate, particularly for the working group structure here. And again, this was intended to be kind of an overview since the Price Formations Initiative, or Price Formation Enhancements Initiative had already begun prior to us kind of introducing this working group concept. So this is kind of a recap of conversations that had happened past. We hear you loud and clear, and I will echo James's comment that it would be great, we are going to call for proposals or refinements to guiding principles, proposals to new ones, and the same thing for problem statements. So we really look forward to hearing from the stakeholder community here on what those problem statements should be to address both scarcity pricing and the BAA level market power mitigation. So thank you very much, and we look forward to an engaging discussion with all of you on developing those. So Really quickly here, I want to provide just a brief, again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is merely meant to serve as kind of a launching point for the discussion. At this point, we're going to be leveraging the live polling feature here in WebEx, but before we go into those open questions, here are some of the kind of proposed guiding principles, right? Again, all of these can be refined and new ones can be added. This is where we're really leaning on the stakeholder community to have a very engaged discussion on this. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go over these, and we will have a little bit of time to get live feedback and have open discussion. So we're shifting the MO, right, of the working group from presentation to very active back and forth here. So for the consideration of the stakeholder community, some of the guiding principles on enhancing scarcity pricing mechanisms that we'd like to get your thoughts on are posted here on the screen. They were also included in the issue paper as well. I do want to highlight, and I'm not a fan of reading slides to you guys. I know that you're more than capable of that, and we are going to have that polling kind of individually highlight each one of these. But one of the things I did want to highlight here is that last slide. We thought it would be good for the stakeholder community to consider this one as well, which is to protect from scarcity pricing provisions triggered through the exercise of market power, kind of tying, again, scarcity pricing and that BAA level MPM together. So event producer Adrian, if we could go ahead and start the Slido portion of the presentation. So to kind of reiterate what Brenda had mentioned at the onset, for those of you who are in the room, we do have the passcode and the event code there on the whiteboard. You can log in through a different device. For all of you who are joining us virtually, there will be on the bottom right-hand corner on the right side, the questions will pop up for you to provide your response. We're not going to go through a timer, but we are going to just kind of use these, again, as a launching point to talk about as a community, as a group. We'll see the results come through kind of collectively, and hopefully that can kind of spur some discussion on whether or not we feel as a community that we can go ahead and accept that as a guiding principle, put it more into that for policy development, for that action plan, for that straw proposal, or if there's going to be further discussion on needing to refine it to reflect the perspectives here of this community. And then, Callie, to your point, also, are we missing a guiding principle to be included here? So we'd really like to hear from you on that. So, Adrian, if we could go ahead and launch for the first guiding principle that is, again, a proposal to kind of begin this conversation. So what you should see right now is, in essence, a yes/no question, and then also an open text field for you to kind of share your thoughts if you think it should be refined, edited, or if you have a disagreement on this moving forward as a guiding principle, and then I'd like to open it up for discussion amongst the community here. So the first one would be, should a guiding principle of the price formation enhancements policy development be that we are trying to enable prices to accurately reflect the willingness of market participants to avoid involuntary demand curtailment. So we're going to give everybody a moment here to either answer just yes, no, and then also provide some additional thought if you think it needs to be refined or if you disagree with this being a guiding principle to be included. So I appreciate everybody. I see the number of folks who are in the Slido right now kind of increasing. So I think everybody's kind of accessing here and providing their feedback. So bear with us for a moment while we get the pulse survey, if you will, right? I do also want to say we are going to post the results of this survey on the initiative page. But again, these are to inform the discussion amongst this community. So these are not binding results. They are meant to serve more as a conversation starter. So. Okay, so I see we still have responses rolling in. So let's give it just a little bit more time. We'll kind of give that visual of what the community feels on this guiding principle, and we can launch into further discussion here. Okay. I do see that the responses have somewhat slowed here. Adrian, could we go ahead and present the results for this first question on the reflection of willingness to avoid involuntary demand curtailments? Do I need to answer it? I don't think I should answer it. Oh, okay. Yeah. Adrian, can I go ahead and cancel this? I don't want to. There we go. Thank you. And if we could please present the results.
Okay, you should see the results now. 1 second. Okay, stand by, a little technical difficulties on my end. 1 second.
Not a problem, Adrian. I appreciate it. You know, this is a mechanism to kind of spur the conversation on. So let's give it a little bit of time. But at the end of the day, I think that we could also kind of fall back to simply raising the hand. We'd really like to hear everybody's thoughts. So oh, there we go. All right. So as nice a feature as it might be to see kind of a pulse survey while we work through these technical difficulties, I would like to hear from the community here. If anybody has any strong feelings. Do you see it right there? Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. I'm going to borrow this. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I think you need to answer on your end, Juan, and you can see it.
Oh, understood. Okay. What I'm going to do, I don't want to, again, as the facilitator of this working group, I don't want to have any input into these results. This is for the stakeholder community. So, Adrian, I have Brenda's computer here. I see an overwhelming yes. I see 91% of the results have come in, that this should be a guiding principle to move forward into the straw proposal. Adrian, are we also seeing, I'm assuming I'm reading this correctly, that we do not have any additional written comment for the open text question?
There we go. You should see it now.
Very good. All right. So this is precisely what it is that we were hoping to get, right? So we do have, I think we're very close here. We have strong agreement on the heart of the guiding principle, but with some refinement. And again, this is going to serve as a collection of these viewpoints. We will post these survey results, and then we can kind of continue on with further discussion. So I'm seeing comments, and I'm assuming the entire community is also seeing these comments about different limitations to perhaps put onto this, as it could result in very extreme values. Need to define, although we need to define accurately a little bit better. That's good feedback as well. I think that that's something that we could definitely probably spend a good portion of a future working group session kind of talking about and refining. Getting some feedback that this is perhaps framed too generally to be useful. That's valid feedback. That's something that we'll definitely take back. And again, we are wanting to guide the conversation. So, you know, our expectation was that these would require some refinement and back and forth with the stakeholder community. So perhaps we could get it to be a little bit less general. I do also want to highlight, though, that the guiding principle will serve as, in essence, something for us to point back to, look back on as a community as we move forward into the straw proposal and policy development phase. So we are going to need to strike that balance, right, between having something be too general and having something be too specific. But this is precisely the feedback that we're looking for, so I really appreciate that. We have a comment of that we should add to it while incorporating or retaining reasonable caps to protect ratepayers. This is great feedback. This is anonymous. I do not have the stakeholder who put in this comment in front of me for any of these comments. That being said, I am going to, in essence, kind of put you guys, generally speaking and anonymously on the spot. Adrian, why don't we go ahead and open this up to the line? I'd like to open the floor to the stakeholder community if anybody would like to either react to one of these comments for the refinement of this principle. Again, we're at 91% that yes, this should be included, so I think we're already pretty close on getting our first guiding principle down. But if anybody would like to expand on the comments they made, or if anybody would like to react to a comment they're reading from the community, please go ahead and raise your hand. Are we seeing any hands raised, Adrian?
At this time, no, I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, very good. Well, appreciate everybody. I think we got the technical difficulties kind of. Oh, all right, there we go. We have someone in the room. Please go ahead.
So this is Don Trethway at GDS Associates for CISA. You know, I find the willingness of market participants to be sort of unclear. And I think you could be more precise in talking about the value of lost load or something like that, to where you want the market to be able to reflect that. And then lastly, I think the comment with while incorporating and retaining reasonable caps, I think that gets at the issue that James brought up earlier about what do you do when there's, you know, long-term problems like what they experienced with some of the winter storms in Texas. So I think it'd be good to bifurcate those into two separate principles.
Thanks, Don. No, that's great feedback. You know, we're not thinking that we're going to have all these guiding principles nailed down. That's appreciate you sharing that. Are there any reactions to Don's comment there from the rest of the stakeholder community in support as an alternative viewpoint? Please go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to speak up. Brendan, do we have any hands? I need to lean on you there. Okay. Okay. Yeah, if we could please unmute Kyle.
Stand by. Kyle, you are now unmuted.
Novice Public Advocate's Office. Love to use the Slido, of course. Can you hear me? Everything?
Yes, we can.
Great. So yeah, Kyle Navas, Public Advocate's Office. I just wanted to react to the suggestion about bifurcating the principal. You know, obviously we're interested in these in caps or having some kind of limits on what that looks like. And yeah, acknowledging that James brought that up earlier. In terms of bifurcating it, you know, to some degree we're parsing out and splitting hairs here. I generally prefer the idea maybe of not bifurcating it to just so that there's not so much disconnection between the idea of you know high, you know, you can have an interesting discussion about elasticities and how high prices ought to go in scarcity events, but then if you do that entirely outside of the kind of realm of what a reasonable cap looks like, you might end up with two pretty divergent conclusions. So you know, I'm not saying we would oppose setting those apart, but it seems like it's useful to keep them tightly connected. Thanks.
Appreciate you you sharing that perspective, Kyle. Yep. No, this is all great feedback. Again, this is working group session number 1. We're refining it. We're going to work together to discuss and try to, you know, get to a place where we're going to have some guiding principles and policy statements moving forward. So appreciate both of you, Don and Kyle, for sharing your thoughts there. And I think this is definitely highlighting that this is going to be one of the guiding principles that is going to be a topic of further discussion. I do want to at least remain open if anybody else would like to share their thoughts on this guiding principle before we move on to the next. So kind of a last call to raise your hand to either react and or provide a new perspective.
We do have Steve Greenlist. Let's go ahead and unmute him. Please make sure to introduce yourself.
Hey, this is actually Perry Servideo. You've unmuted me. I don't know if you meant to unmute someone else.
We'll take your unmute, Perry, but we'll go to Steve after you. Good to hear from you.
Okay, Perry Servideo, GDS Associates. I just wanted to react to Kyle. So the suggestion that Don was getting at, where someone had added that we should add while incorporating or retaining reasonable caps. I think the idea of talking about caps here is already baked into saying what's the consumer's willingness to pay. And this is where Don was going with the precise language, I think, is if we were actually talking about a value of lost load, then you can get the consumers essentially to agree on what a value of lost load curve should look like up front. And therein it's an implied cap. So what my point is, you can make the language of the guiding principle a little bit more clean, and I think it implies this this idea of this cap. That might be one solution there.
Okay. No, Perry, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Again, at the end of this, we are going to post the results, and we are going to have this open to stakeholder comment. So I think we're quickly getting our working group session 2 discussion or agenda put together. So I appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. Let's go ahead and go to Steve so that he can share his perspective.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Steve Greenleaf, Brookfield. Just very quickly, agree with what Don and Perry have said. I will admit I'm the author of the need to better define accurately because I'm not sure what it means in this context. Generally, a market participant is going to express their willingness to pay or be curtailed via their bid. But as Don noted and Perry noted, you know, kind of generally in the context of load curtailment, it's, you know, been in terms of that value of lost load. So somewhere in here, and I'm not sure, maybe this is where you were going with the term or the word accurately, but there's kind of a balance between, uh, uh, you know, market participant bid price and some kind of administrative reflection of that value of lost load. And how that relates, quite honestly, to, it might be better to understand how exactly the other RTOs that you cited to determine those values, because I think, once again, it's kind of a balancing between those 2 points. Thanks.
No, thank you, Steve, and thank you for putting your name on that anonymous comment. And I think that goes back to something that James alluded to earlier as he was going through the overview or the issue paper overview here, is that ability to perhaps have a session where we are doing that comparative analysis. We had Alan also speak to some of the data that he'd like to see there. So this is great feedback, and I appreciate you raising your hand and sharing. Do we have any additional hands up on this guiding principle? Okay, very good. So Adrian, if we could please go ahead and move to the next Slido question.
Question is launched.
Thank you very much. Okay, so very similar construct, right? Yes, no, NA, and if it needs to be refined, how? So should the following be a guiding principle? Enable prices to indicate that reserves are dwindling and approaching NERC required minimum levels, and to reflect costs that operators may be incurring to maintain those reserves. So I see we are already getting responses in, so thank you very much. Please go ahead and give us your thoughts, and again, feel free to use that open text to kind of serve as a discussion launcher, right, as we just did with that first guiding principle. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. I will be NA so that I do not skew the results whatsoever. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, we are seeing responses coming in. Thank you again, everybody, for your participation and sharing your thoughts. You don't have to raise your hand and do it verbally. You can do it here as well, although we encourage both of them. This is precisely what we're looking for with this working group structure. So again, should we enable prices to indicate that reserves are dwindling and approaching the NERC required minimum levels and reflect the costs that operators may be incurring to maintain said reserves? I think quite a few coming in, or give it a little bit more time for those who are providing written comment to share their thoughts. Okay, I am starting to see the comments slow down a little bit. Oh, spoke a little too soon. Thank you, everybody. All right, we'll give it about, let's give it about 20 more seconds, and let's take a look at these results and have some more discussion on it. All right, so I think I learned that I need to put a soft deadline on time for you guys. I'm seeing a lot of comments roll in now. Okay, so I will go ahead and send in my NA. So Adrian, if we could please go ahead and present the results for guiding principle, proposed guiding principle number 2. Okay, so a quick clarification on NA, which was kind of a game time audible. So NA is going to serve for me as the facilitator, so that I am not, you know, as an ISO employee, skewing these results whatsoever. So I think we might need to come back to this, but for the sake of conversation, I'm going to take your selection of NA to this guiding principle to be somewhat analogous to a no. And so this one, we have much less alignment on, as you can see, right? So 57% yes to 25% NA, 18% no. Again, moving forward, let's leave the NA just to be for myself to not skew the results. But this is something that we're definitely seeing as a guiding principle that's going to require some more discussion. So thank you for providing that feedback. Adrian, if we could please see the written comment here, people kind of expanding on why they feel strongly about this one not being a guiding principle. So I'm going to just kind of highlight in no particular order, right, just seeing what, so Sean, Sean asked a question in the chat. What does it mean that NA is for to not skew the results? So this is simply a logistical item for the meeting itself. In order for me to view these results and kind of encourage this discussion, I had to vote. Being the facilitator, I didn't feel it appropriate for me to provide a yes or a no. So that NA is, in essence, my way of being able to advance from a meeting logistics perspective, but also not have my yes or no count towards what is supposed to be representative of the stakeholders community, your perspectives. So I appreciate that question. Hopefully that made sense. And again, sorry, it was a good game time audible there, but kind of threw it in there in the middle of this. So why would a generator owner withhold resources except in tight conditions? What kind of generator costs more than 250 megawatts to make available? We have somebody that is addressing Callie's point earlier. We need to perhaps better define what we are approaching scarcity levels and whether or how operator actions are reflected in those prices. I see a comment here that I'm hoping that the individual who put it in wouldn't mind expanding on, but we need appropriate linkage to energy scarcity pricing. I think that's kind of I'd love to hear a little bit more on that. If you're open to that, I'd love for you to raise your hand and say more. This is a good comment for us to talk about here, kind of similar to Don, your comment about the last guiding principle. Seems like there are two ideas to unpack here, right? Do we perhaps need to have a discussion on bifurcating this? First, that the idea that prices should rise prior to minimum reserve levels, and second, what should those prices be? That's a great point and something that I'd really encourage people to raise their hand and talk about here. So rather than read all these comments, they should be visible to you. Adrian, could we do the same thing and open this up? Please raise your hand if you would like to expand upon your comment here, or if you have a reaction to one of the comments that you're reading. Again, this time we are at 57% yes, much less alignment. So let's have a discussion here. So please go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to expand upon your comment or react to something that you're seeing.
All right, at this time, we have no questions in the queue.
Absolutely. So no questions in the queue in the room. James would like to comment. James, please go ahead.
This is James Friedrich from CAISA. So I want to provide some more context to maybe spur some more discussion here. So these last two principles really touch at two common ways for setting price quantity pairs for as it relates to demand curves for AS or reserve products, which as I mentioned in my presentation, AS scarcity pricing is the way we effectuate energy scarcity pricing as we approach reserve shortage or reserve scarcity, we anticipate that that scarcity becomes reflected in the energy price through opportunity cost. So the two really common methods are, one, that you look at sort of a value of lost load perspective and a probability of, a probability maybe of reaching that constraint violation. And so you take, a value of lost load number and you multiply it by, at any given point on a reserve scarcity curve, the probability of actually being in a real shortage at that level, and that's how you define the prices and steps of the curve. But other ISOs use different techniques, and one of them is actually this principle where they're defining the price and the quantity by sort of what we'll call the next operator action. So as folks may know, as we approach scarce conditions, operators are taking actions to protect and hold reserves. It could be through exceptional dispatch. Depending on how extreme the situation is, the more extreme sort of the impact on pricing these things become. And so there's also this concept of, well, if operators are feeling like they need to be put in a position to take action to protect against shortage, then the cost of those actions should be reflected in the price. And so I'm trying to look back to see if I can see the exact language, but it's not on the screen anymore. But in essence, that's sort of what, and it could be a combination of these two things as well, of course, where you might have different reserves using different techniques to set their shortage pricing. So that's sort of what's intended to be captured in these principles. And I'll turn it back to you, Juan.
I appreciate that, James. Any reactions to David's comments there? Okay, seeing none. Steve, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Steve Greenleaf Brookfield. And once again, I'll out myself. I made to WPTF's point, but to James's point, and I think this is what I was getting at, I'd never really thought about it in terms, and I profess I don't have a great background on how the other RTOs may set prices based on operator actions, but it's kind of an interesting dynamic there because I generally think of setting, to my earlier point, more of kind of an administrative price you would set something to. But I think in the context, absolutely an operator action needs to, in my view, kind of set a floor for a price during a period, because if the operators are out buying energy or something from a neighboring BAA or triggering RDRR, whatever, there are things, at least in my mind, that should set a floor on what the scarcity price should be. I don't know if that makes sense, but the way that principle was written kind of triggered that thought. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Any other reactions here?
That is it.
Okay. Well, if we could go ahead and move on to the next Slido poll here, taking a look at time, I think we're right on time here. So let's go ahead and move to the next question, please. Okay. So this guiding principle, or proposed guiding principle rather, should the guiding principle be that we are ensuring CAISO's scarcity pricing mechanism allows for market participants to transact in an equitable manner compared to non-market transactions in the broader Western interconnection. I see the questions rolling in. I think hopefully you guys are kind of getting a hang of this Slido. We really appreciate that. So we'll give it a little bit of time for those who want to give additional detail within the open text question.
Or you can see too.
Yeah. Yeah, please, Don, go ahead.
Could you, this is Don Trethewey from CISA. Could you put a little more context around this one? I'm having a hard time understanding what it is. I don't know if it's the term market participant that's tripping me up, but I mean, I can see you may want something that you don't want prices suppressed in CAISO so that CAISO doesn't attract outside offers. Is that what you're trying to get at, or?
This is James from CAISO. Yeah, more or less. So I think broadly what we're getting at here is in tight system conditions that are across the West, is the CAISO market providing a good deal, essentially relative to what supply can get in non-market transactions, enough to incentivize their participation of their capacity in the market? Does that make more sense?
Yes.
All right, thanks. And if I may, sort of tie it back to Alan Mex from SDG&E's comment about comparison of sort of WEC, bilateral pricing to CAISO is sort of maybe an indicator of whether or not those are comparable.
All right, so we are still seeing answers come in here. So let's give it another, let's say 30 seconds. And we'll go ahead.
Question already from Dan, if you want to go ahead with that.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Please go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan, you're unmuted.
Hi, good morning. This is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. First, just want to thank the CAISO and really acknowledge the effort that's going on here, not just in this initiative, but broadly in the stakeholder process with these working groups. It's a very welcome development, so thank you for that. This question, kind of regardless the phrasing of it, I think hits to something that's just growing in importance over the last few years. And as we've gone through any of the heat wave events that we've had or others, the disconnect between how prices form in the non-CAISO West and within CAISO, splitting apart into the WEC soft offer cap, other issues that come up in hourly versus sub-hourly pricing, pricing of EIM resources versus resources that are non-participating, those sorts of things. There have just been a lot of disconnects that I think have led to inefficient market outcomes over time that, as we work through this initiative, can at least acknowledge that anything that we do here that improves the accuracy, efficiency, et cetera, of CAISO's prices will hopefully allow more alignment with the rest of the West. But as the rest of the West develops, we're also going to have to see how that plays out and sort of stay nimble to the markets that are developing. There's a high likelihood that there are two or more organized markets in the West, and that there will still persist to be bilateral markets in the day ahead in real time alongside those as everything sort of develops and settles. And I think some of the lessons we've learned from the Eastern markets are that markets that have similar price formation can really leverage each other to help consumers, help reliability, and deliver, kind of efficient and least cost dispatch because they're not kind of singing from different playbooks at the point where we really need them to be coordinating well together. I know we can't expand this initiative and don't want to slow it down to sort of focus on market to market type of dispatch, but I just want to acknowledge the the benefit that's there and that this work can over time head in that direction. And I think that this principle kind of points there as well. So I'll try to put that in comments, written comments in a clear way as well, but just wanted to offer that up.
I appreciate you you sharing that, Dan. I'm curious, any reactions to that from the community? Support, alternative perspective. Again, this is for the stakeholders, this working group construct, so please feel free to raise your hand and leverage it. Yep, let's go ahead and close the poll and present those survey results, and maybe we can have a little bit more discussion based off of those. All right, so Adrian, I do see the survey is locked. If we could share those results, please. Okay, so 57% yes. Again, this is one where we have, I think, more discussion. Let's go ahead and look at the comments so we can take a look at the refinement that is perhaps desired, or the rationales shared as to the disagreement of this guiding principle. So Adrian, if we could share the open text responses, please. Thank you, sir. Okay, so this is for everybody to see. Again, I don't want to read all of these to you, but I also want to be very cognizant of not reading one comment, reading a different comment. So please take a moment to review these. There are a couple that are jumping out. Would really like to have, the community's reactions to these, or if anybody, Steve, if you want to kind of out yourself again on which one is your comment, feel free as well. So please raise your hand and let's discuss a little bit here. I see a lot of refinement comments. I see, the cost cap should be based on the marginal unit, not other BAA caps. Kind of consider rewording this to focus more on attracting Western supply, which implies commensurate prices. Here's kind of a clarifying question. Not sure what is meant by transact in an equitable manner. Also, what are non-market transactions? Some feedback that this is too open-ended. What is equitable? Suggest reframing in terms of comparability of market outcomes. So that's a second kind of very similar feedback there on the verbiage and kind of clearly defining what we mean by the guiding principle. Okay, here we have no, but could change to yes if it were rewritten. It's very vague. I think it implies a strategic reliability reserve. It would be helpful to define the implied inequities as well. So I see, this is a pretty common thread, right? A little bit more clarity on what we are talking about when we say equitable. I'd like to open the lines up for anybody to kind of further expand or react to those comments. So Adrian, do we have any hands raised?
At this time, we have no hands raised.
Okay. Let's give it a moment. Well, let me pose a question then. If we continue to have no hands raised, I'd like to pose the question to the stakeholder community here. So please raise your hand to respond to this. We have a lot of comments here about more clearly defining what we mean by equitable. A lot of these kind of I'm interpreting them, right, as refinement comments. What does equitable mean to you? Any hands?
We do have
see
two
Perry
hands
and
in the queue.
Steve. Yeah, Perry, please go ahead.
Hey, Perry Servideo, GDS. I don't have an answer to your question. My hand was up actually before you asked it. I just wanted to maybe make an observation here that all of the comments related to rewording, and I don't know what this means. I think all of that indicates that maybe the task here is to take this one back and go for where, reword it to go for what you're actually going for. I personally had interpreted this as simply just when you're in tight conditions, and if the rest of the West are in tight conditions, you want prices that'll attract supply, so you're not the one that's needing to shed load. I had just interpreted it simply that way, just attracting Western supply, and that was my comment on there. And I'd like to get some reflection from you guys on if I hadn't even interpreted that right. If I didn't, then maybe I go back to sort of revoting on this one. But it'd be good to hear from James if that's really what this one is all about.
Yeah, James, please go ahead.
This is James Friedrich from CAISO. I think that's pretty much exactly what we're thinking in a much fewer words. And it is tough to be both precise and vague enough for these to be principles, so please bear with us. But I think broadly what we're thinking of is the way you put it, that when the West is tight, the CAISO market, the opportunities that exist via pricing through CAISO's market are competitive with other options for selling power across the West, so that CAISO market participants have can attract the supply when it's needed. So that might be a more succinct way of putting it.
Thanks for that, James.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think with that explanation from you, then I would, this is just, my personal opinion on some of these comments then. I think it kind of throws out then this idea of cost should be based on marginal unit, not other BAA caps, and anything that's going in that direction, because really that's kind of counter to when you're actually in a scarcity condition. A scarcity condition is a lack of supply, in which then the demand side is what drives the price. It goes to the highest bidder at that point, and I think that's where you were going with some of these other ones, is that price actually needs to rise above the marginal unit as demand in California is trying to attract supply to its market. So, if you go back to the drawing board on this one, that's just another comment to consider there. Thanks.
I appreciate you sharing that, Perry. And again, this is precisely what we're looking for, right? So good feedback on potential refinement of the language of this guiding principle here. I do want to give a quick time check, and I think, Callie, it might work to yours comment. I think we'll probably end on the guiding principles here for scarcity pricing, and that will allow us to kind of come back and reframe, right, the BAA level MPM from the earlier conversation. So I see Steve Gobb and Steve Greenleaf have their hands raised, so let's go ahead and go through there. Let's go to, yep, there we go, and we'll make sure that we get the last two guiding principles here. So Steve, please go ahead.
I'll be quick. This is Steve Galby with Bonneville Power. I'm going to echo what Perry said, and also I was really happy to hear James reference competition. I think the use of the word equitable in this principle is a little confusing. Ultimately, CAISO is trying to attract supply and compete on equal footing with other opportunities that suppliers have available. What we really want to avoid is transactions being forced to clear in CAISO at prices below comparable markets. So maybe in reworking this principle, really referencing competition would be a good idea.
Thank you for that feedback, Steve. Let's go to Steve Greenleaf.
Thanks, Steve Greenleaf, Brookfield. I voted no, and quite honestly, I didn't understand this. So based on James' clarification, based on Perry's comment, if it was reworded the way James, you stated it, I think I could vote. I could vote yes for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. No, that's this is precisely what we're hoping for out of these sessions. So, you know, between now and the second session, the team here can work internally to refine this this guiding principle. So I really appreciate y'all. I'm from Texas. I say y'all. Sorry about that. I really appreciate you guys weighing in. So, Adrian, in the interest of time and making sure that we wrap up on, at the very least, the guiding principles for scarcity pricing, could we go ahead and put up the question, thank you, for our fifth proposed guiding principle here. Should a guiding principle for the policy development here be that we need to provide stronger incentives for market participants to perform and deliver in tight system conditions? There's obviously incentive already there. Do we need to make them stronger incentives for market participants to deliver in these tight system conditions? So I see the responses coming in here. Let's go ahead and let's give it, 45 seconds or so. So again, yes, no, refinement, your thoughts. Do we need the scarcity pricing mechanism to provide stronger incentives for participants to perform and deliver in tight system conditions? So I'm seeing a large influx here of answers. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and about 10 more seconds, and we'll close it and present. All right, so Adrian, if we could please present the results here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we still have some rolling in here. So again, not quite as strong as the first one with the 93%, at 64%. I'm quite interested to see the write-in comments here. So Adrian, if we could please share the write-in comments. And again, as you may have seen just now, those comments are continuing, or those votes do continue to kind of go live. So if you're voting while we are having this discussion, again, we are going to be posting the survey results that we used in this working group to the stakeholder initiative page. So quite a bit. Reword to, reword to, I'm not sure. Reword to incent supply should not be focused on market participant behavior. Allowing, no, we need to go back. Yep. Allowing prices to rise significantly above marginal costs in tight conditions to allow the exercise of market power. Generator performance incentives in a market with RA paradigm should be through performance penalties out of market. This is the first time we've seen a comment in the other direction. This should be more general. Do we need to have additional incentives? That's an interesting perspective that I hope you expand upon a little bit here. It isn't clear that the incentives aren't currently strong enough. So do we need to spend a little bit of time in the working group sessions here, kind of exploring the current mechanisms that exist to kind of further inform this guiding principle? Should also include penalties for resources that are RA obligated to be available or otherwise had been awarded a bid to deliver at the IFM. Not sure what stronger means. Again, I think that kind of goes back to potentially exploring the current mechanisms to kind of gauge whether or not this guiding principle needs some refinement. We have another one here. This is extremely important. James highlighted how today's construct is inadequate in this regard. Yes, but replace incentive with signals because signals cover both incentives and penalties. So I'm seeing a couple common threads here, more about supply, perhaps being a little bit more general. I see quite a bit on penalties coming in here. Need to include DR in this market participant category. Again, what kind of incentives? So I think we need a little bit, what I'm hearing from you guys, is a little bit more clarity on some of these terms. So let's go ahead and open up the phone lines and talk a little bit about your thoughts that you're sharing here. And again, I know that we're running on time here. This conversation will continue and will be heavily informed by these results that are still coming in via the comment feature. So do we have any hands raised on anybody who would like to expand upon or react to the comments they're seeing? I see Perry has his hand up. Let's go ahead and unmute him.
Hey, Perry Savidio, GDS again. Thanks for this. I just wanted to point out that I'm a bit concerned and would like Kaiso's perspective on the comments. There's essentially a category of these comments that are saying, no, we don't, in other words, it says, no, we don't want the market price to do anything. We'd rather do things out of market and through other sort of penalty mechanisms. I think the point of Kaiso pursuing scarcity pricing policy is to get more of these things into the market price so that first, generators can be appropriately compensated for the value they're providing in a scarce reliability condition. Second, it's to make sure that generators that go offline that we were going to depend on are appropriately penalized because of the price difference from the day ahead to the real-time market. And third, and it's not really, this principle doesn't really read this way, but if you have the potential for those prices to go up in real time, which I think is where this is going, it'll appropriately signal that load should not be under scheduling in the day ahead market, which is an important piece that I think is missing today. So all around it's good, and I would think that this should be more about getting these getting everything into the prices, not trying to take things out and do some separate penalty mechanism and some out of market actions, et cetera. So I just wanted to add that caution. It'd be good to get Kaiso's reflection on those comments as well. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Perry. And again, this working group is for this community, so I would actually welcome if anybody that would like to react to Perry's comments there from the stakeholder group. And again, with running on time here, I think this is something that we are definitely picking right back up. So I appreciate your comments. Would anyone like to respond? So I see Meg McNall has her hand up. Could we please unmute Meg?
Meg McNall with Thompson Coburn for 6 Cities. I actually did not want to respond directly to Perry, but I had a process question and suggestion, which is, given the complexity of some of these questions, it's what I'm hearing and sort of seeing in some of the survey responses is that people have some very nuanced thoughts on the framing of some of these guiding principles and how they should be worded. is the CAISO able to take any written comments on the principles, or is there a way that if we have suggestions for rewording, we can submit those to you all for consideration and discussion in a future working group meeting?
Absolutely, Meg. So we will be posting both the survey results, which hopefully might inform that, on the stakeholder initiative page. We have the comment tool there as well. So please feel free to provide that in between the working group sessions. I think we really wanted to lean on this live to, again, kind of encourage this very active dialogue back and forth during these working groups. But that mechanism will exist, and we look forward to the entire community's comments on their thoughts on the refinements for these guiding principles.
Terrific, thank you.
Of course. All right. You know, the new principle that we added here as far as, you know, making sure that provisions are triggered through exercise market power, perhaps we can table that one for the next session here. But since it is a new principle that we added from the issue paper, James, I'd like to, if you have any thoughts on that one, maybe to close us out, I'd like to give the floor to you.
Thanks. This is James Friedrich from CAISO. Honestly, it was a little bit of a whiff not to have put this in the overview paper, which is why it's highlighted as new here. But it definitely is something that was reflected in comments to the issue paper about the connection between scarcity pricing and market power, and really also gets to some of the rationale why the topics are linked in this discussion. And so it was an omission that we would like to consider part of the discussion.
Thanks, James. So I'd like to thank everybody for their very active participation here. Again, as we just replied back to Meg, we are going to have some comment, and we're going to have much more robust discussion on these. So I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate their willingness to engage in the dialogue. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Brenda Corona for our next steps.
Great, thanks. We're going to go ahead and wrap up our call. But the next step is just showing a calendar that we provided for the stakeholder community. So we plan to do a few hybrid meetings and here and there, so we will definitely notice those ahead of time to make sure those meetings work with everyone's schedule. So we did take feedback from our stakeholders in terms of what meetings are scheduled. So if you do have more feedback, let us know. We are doing our best to kind of accommodate with the other working groups. And then at this time, we do have any questions to our stakeholder affairs website. It has overview paper and this presentation. Feel free to email me for any questions. We look forward to seeing you at our next working group next week on August 10th. And then with that, I will go ahead and close our meeting on time, hopefully, Adrian. But we look forward to hearing from you, and this call will be recorded and posted along with the survey. So thanks so much, team, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, and this concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.